The last person you expect to ruin you is the one who makes your heart race. But mine shattered my heart and my career in one move. My name is Ava Monroe, and if you told me a year ago that the man I trusted most at work would turn out to be my biggest enemy, I would have laughed. I was careful, professional, the kind of woman who kept her head down and her guard up. But sometimes the people who seem the safest are the ones you should fear the most. It started innocently enough. Ethan was new to the company, but he fit in fast. He was charming, funny, and had that easy confidence that made everyone want to be around him. He landed on my project team like he'd belonged there all along and wasted no time flattering my work. "You're the smartest person in this room, Ava," he'd say, and I'd laugh it off, but it felt good to be seen. We started working late together, bouncing ideas off each other and sharing inside jokes. He'd bring me coffee in the mornings, leave little notes on my desk, and always seemed to know when I needed a break. It was the kind of attention I'd never gotten from anyone at work before. My friends teased me about the office romance, but I insisted it was just friendship. Still, I couldn't deny the butterflies in my stomach every time he smiled at me. One night, after a marathon session prepping for a big client pitch, Ethan suggested we grab dinner. "We deserve it," he said, flashing that grin. Over sushi and wine, the walls between us crumbled. He told me about his childhood, his dreams, and his fears. He listened when I talked about my ambitions, my frustrations, and my hope for a promotion that had been dangled in front of me for years. "You're a star, Ava," he said, his hand brushing mine across the table. "Anyone who can't see that is blind." That night, he kissed me. It was gentle, sweet, and felt like the start of something real. For the first time in a long time, I let myself hope, not just for my career, but for something more. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Ethan and I grew closer, both at work and outside of it. We kept things quiet, not wanting to be office gossip, but I could tell people suspected. He was always supportive, always encouraging, always telling me how much he believed in me. When the promotion I'd been working toward finally opened up, he was the first to say, "It's yours, Ava. No one deserves it more." I threw myself into the application process, working harder than ever. Ethan helped me prep for the interviews, reviewed my presentations, and even stayed up late with me to practice answers to tough questions. "You've got this, Ava," he whispered, holding me close. "I'll be right there with you." But then the warmth faded. Ethan grew distant, cold, distracted, as if the late nights and whispered promises had never happened. He stopped coming by my desk, stopped texting me good morning, and stopped making plans for after work. When I asked if something was wrong, he brushed me off. "Just busy," he said, "lots on my plate." I tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was stressed about his own work. Maybe he needed space. But the knot in my stomach grew tighter with every passing day. Then the rumors started. I heard from a friend in HR that Ethan was also applying for the promotion. I laughed it off at first. He'd never mentioned it, and we'd always talked about how it was my turn. But when I asked him directly, he hesitated. "I didn't want to make things weird," he said. "But yeah, I threw my hat in the ring. It's just business, Ava. You understand, right?" I felt like the floor had dropped out under my feet. I tried to play it cool, but inside I was reeling. Had everything between us been a lie? Was he just using me to get ahead? I started replaying every conversation, every late night, every secret I'd shared. Had I just handed him the blueprint to steal my future? The day of the final interviews, Ethan was all business. He barely looked at me and barely spoke. I tried to focus, to remember why I deserved this promotion, but my confidence was shaken. When it was my turn to present, I stumbled over my words, my mind racing with doubts. I saw Ethan in the back of the room, watching me with an unreadable expression. Afterwards, he found me in the hallway. "You did great," he said, but his eyes were cold. "No matter what happens, I hope we can still be friends." That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, replaying every moment, every red flag I'd ignored. I realized I'd let my guard down, let myself believe in something that was never real. I felt foolish, angry, and more alone than ever. A week later, the announcement came. Ethan got the promotion. The email went out to the whole company, praising his leadership, vision, and dedication. My name wasn't mentioned once. He came by my desk, all smiles and fake sympathy. "No hard feelings, Ava. You'll get it next time." I stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as the man I'd fallen for, but as the rival who'd played me from the start. That was the moment I stopped being his victim and started planning his reckoning.
The days after the announcement were torture. Every congratulatory email, every handshake in the hallway, every "you must be so proud of him" was another knife in my back. I forced a smile, nodded, and tried to keep my head up. But inside, I was unraveling. I replayed every moment with Ethan, every late-night strategy session, and every secret I'd shared. I realized how much I'd let him in, how much I trusted him with my ideas, my plans, and my heart. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I started to notice things I'd missed before. In meetings, Ethan would present solutions that sounded eerily familiar, ideas I'd shared with him in confidence, and strategies I'd mapped out on my laptop while he sat beside me, nodding and taking notes. He parroted my phrases, my jokes, even my stories, like my voice had become his mask. The realization hit me like a punch. He hadn't just stolen my promotion, he'd stolen my voice. I tried to confront him, but he brushed me off with that same easy charm. "Ava, you're overreacting. We're a team, remember? We bounce ideas off each other all the time. That's how this works." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Don't let this ruin what we had." What we had? The words weren't tender, they were a weapon, a reminder that I'd never been more than a stepping stone. I realized then that Ethan had never seen me as an equal. I was a stepping stone, a resource, a means to an end. The betrayal cut deeper than any professional setback ever could. I confided in my friend and mentor, Leela, who'd been with the company for over a decade. She listened quietly as I poured out the whole story of how Ethan had wormed his way into my life, how he'd used our relationship to get ahead, and how he'd left me behind without a second thought. When she finished, she put her hand on mine and said, "You have to fight back, Ava, not just for yourself, but for every woman who's ever been used and discarded by someone like him." Her words didn't just comfort me, they turned my heartbreak into fuel. I started gathering evidence, old emails, shared documents, meeting notes, and even a few voice memos where I'd brainstormed solutions while he listened and encouraged me. The more I dug, the more obvious it became Ethan had built his entire pitch for the promotion on my work. But I knew that wasn't enough. I needed witnesses, people who'd seen us working together, who'd heard me share my ideas, who could vouch for the fact that what Ethan was presenting as his own was actually mine. I reached out to a few trusted colleagues, asking if they remembered specific meetings or conversations. Some were hesitant, afraid to get involved, but a few quietly admitted they'd always wondered how Ethan seemed to have all the answers so quickly. One even dug up an old group chat, my exact strategy, word for word, sent weeks before Ethan strutted into management with it. I started documenting everything, building a timeline that showed exactly how my ideas had made their way from private conversations to Ethan's public presentations. I organized the evidence into a file, careful to keep it professional and factual. I knew I couldn't let emotion cloud my case. If I wanted to be taken seriously, I had to be meticulous. Meanwhile, Ethan was thriving in his new role. He strutted through the office with a new sense of authority, calling meetings, making decisions, and basking in the praise of upper management. He barely acknowledged me, except for the occasional smug smile or patronizing comment. "You're doing great, Ava. Keep it up. Maybe next time, huh?" Every cell in me wanted to stand up and expose him on the spot, but I bit my tongue. His time was coming, and I'd make sure of it. I knew I needed to be smart, to wait for the right moment. I started paying closer attention to his work, looking for cracks in his facade. It didn't take long to find them. Without my input, his ideas started to falter. Projects stalled, deadlines slipped, and his confidence began to waver. I could see the stress in his eyes, the way he snapped at his team, and the way he avoided difficult questions in meetings. That's when I stopped waiting. I booked a meeting with HR and walked in armed with proof, emails, files, and receipts. His empire was built on my work, and I was ready to tear it down. Bringing my file of evidence and a clear, concise summary of what had happened, I laid out the timeline, the stolen ideas, the manipulation, and the betrayal. I explained how Ethan had used our relationship to gain access to my work, how he presented it as his own, and how he'd left me behind the moment he got what he wanted. The HR manager listened carefully, asking questions and taking notes. When I finished, she looked at me with a mix of sympathy and resolute. "Thank you for coming forward, Ava. This is serious, and we will investigate immediately. You did the right thing." I left the meeting feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. I knew the road ahead would be tough. Ethan was popular, and not everyone would believe me. I knew the road would be ugly. He was popular, charming, dangerous. But this time, I had something stronger than his lies: the truth. And with it, my fight was only beginning.
The investigation started in whispers, but the tension in the office was a scream no one could shut out. HR started calling people in for interviews, colleagues, team leads, even Leela. I could feel the eyes on me in the break room, the way conversations would hush when I walked by. Some people avoided me, afraid to get caught in the crossfire. Others offered small, silent gestures of support, a reassuring smile, a quick squeeze of my hand, and a whispered, "Hang in there." I clung to those moments, letting them remind me I wasn't alone. Ethan sensed the walls closing in. He snapped at his team, fired off frantic midnight emails, and clung to his allies like a drowning man reaching for driftwood. He even tried to corner me in the hallway one afternoon, his voice low and urgent. "Ava, what are you doing? You're making a mistake. This is just going to make things worse for you." I met his stare, my voice steady but sharp. "My only mistake was trusting you. The truth terrifies you, doesn't it, Ethan?" He glared at me, but I could see the fear behind his bravado. For the first time, I realized he wasn't untouchable as he wanted everyone to believe. The days dragged on, each one heavier than the last. HR asked for more documentation, more details, and more context. I provided everything, careful to keep my answers factual and professional. I knew Ethan would try to paint me as bitter, jealous, or unstable. I refused to give him that ammunition. Then came the summons, a meeting with HR, my department head, and even a board member. My pulse hammered. This was it. The room was quiet, the air thick with anticipation. The HR manager began. "Ava, thank you for your patience and your thorough documentation. We've completed our investigation, and the evidence is clear. Ethan used your work, your ideas, and your trust to advance his own career. This is a serious violation of our code of conduct." She paused, letting the words sink in. "Effective immediately, Ethan is stripped of his position. We'll be making a company-wide announcement. Everyone will know what he did, and we want you to know that your courage in coming forward has made a real difference." I felt a wave of relief, but also a strange sense of sadness. I'd wanted justice, but I hadn't wanted things to end this way. I thought about the person I'd once cared for, the friend I thought I'd found, and wondered if any of it had ever been real. The announcement went out that afternoon. The entire company crammed into the main conference room, the air crackling with rumors sharp enough to cut. The head of HR stood at the front, her voice steady as she explained the situation. "We have discovered a serious breach of trust and professional ethics. As a result, Ethan is no longer with the company. We want to remind everyone that integrity and respect are the foundation of our culture. If you ever feel that trust has been broken, please come forward. We will listen. We will act." The room was silent. Some people looked shocked. Others nodded in understanding. I saw Leela in the back, her eyes shining with pride. Mia squeezed my hand, her smile fierce and supportive. After the meeting, people approached me, some to apologize for doubting me, others to thank me for standing up. A few shared their own stories of betrayal and heartbreak, and I realized how many of us had been hurt by people we thought we could trust. Ethan didn't even say goodbye. He slunk out after hours, desk cleared, reputation shattered. A shadow of the man who once thought he owned the place. I heard later that he'd tried to blame me, to spin the story as a misunderstanding, but the evidence was too strong. The truth had finally caught up with him. In the weeks that followed, I focused on healing. I threw myself into my work, determined to prove that I was more than the sum of my scars. I started mentoring younger women in the company, sharing my story and encouraging them to trust their instincts, to protect their ideas, and never let anyone make them feel small. The company began to change too. HR implemented new policies to protect intellectual property, encourage transparency, and support employees who came forward with concerns. The culture shifted, slowly but surely, toward one of respect, collaboration, and real accountability. But the biggest change was in me. I learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own worth, and to set boundaries that no one could cross. Watching Ethan fall wasn't the real revenge. The real revenge was rising higher, turning his betrayal into fuel and making sure no one else could ever pull the same stunt again.
With Ethan gone, the air in the office felt lighter, though beneath it lingered a sharp edge of uncertainty. People were still reeling. Some looked relieved, others uneasy, and a few resented me for daring to shake the system. I got it. Change makes people squirm, especially when it rips open the cracks in a system they'd spent years pretending was solid. But I refused to shrink. Every day, I walked in steady, worked with the same fire and integrity as before, and refused to disappear into the background. I volunteered for new projects, spoke up in meetings, and made sure my ideas carried the one thing Ethan had stolen: my name. Slowly, I noticed a shift. Colleagues who once kept their distance now sought me out, sharing frustrations and asking for advice. I realized my fight had cracked something open. Suddenly, others found the courage to speak up too. Then HR did something I never expected. They asked me to lead a workshop on trust and boundaries at work. At first, I froze. The idea of facing a room full of people who had once doubted me made my stomach knot. But Leela pushed me. "You have a voice now, Ava. Use it. You're not just helping yourself, you're helping everyone who's ever been silenced." The workshop was packed. I didn't share the messy details, only the lessons. Protect your work, trust your instincts, and demand respect. I spoke about documenting everything, building allies, and never letting anyone convince you that wanting credit for your work is asking for too much. The response floored me. Questions, stories, gratitude. For the first time, I felt my pain had transformed into purpose. Meanwhile, the company started changing fast. HR rolled out new rules for collaboration and credit, rules that might have saved me months of pain. Managers were trained to spot manipulation. The board launched an anonymous system so people could finally speak without fear. It wasn't perfect. No system ever is, but at least it was a start. Outside work, I began healing, reconnecting with friends, running again, even escaping to the coast for a weekend just to breathe.
I realized how much I'd lost in the fight and how much I still had left to gain. One evening, as I was leaving the office, I ran into Ethan's replacement, a woman named Priya, who had a reputation for fairness and collaboration. She smiled and said, "I've heard a lot about you, Ava. I hope we can work together to keep making this place better." Her words felt like a promise that change wasn't just possible, it was already happening. I began mentoring younger women at the company. They came with questions about office politics, stolen credit, and surviving toxic coworkers. I told them what I once needed to hear. Trust your gut, guard your work, and never let anyone say you're asking for too much for wanting what you've earned. The more I shared, the more I saw. So many had lived the same story. Some lost promotions, some lost confidence, some walked away entirely. I made it my goal to help them find their voices, remind them they weren't alone, and prove you could come out stronger on the other side. The culture shifted. People were more open, collaboration grew, and credit finally went where it belonged. The old guard, the ones who thrived on secrecy, found themselves isolated. New leaders rose, people who valued respect, transparency, and real teamwork. But I never forgot what it took to get here. I kept documenting, urged others to do the same, and pushed to keep the new systems alive. I knew culture wasn't a one-time fix. It was built daily, decision by decision, conversation by conversation.
Months later, peace finally found me. The nightmares faded. I slept better, laughed more, even dreamed about the future again. And I realized the greatest revenge wasn't just seeing Ethan exposed, it was building something better in the aftermath. Weeks after Ethan's dismissal, the company announced a major leadership shakeup. For the first time, the board invited employees to apply for senior management roles. I almost didn't submit my name, but Leela nudged me. "After everything you've proven, why not you?" The interviews were tough. Ethan had once been the star candidate for opportunities like this, but now his absence left a space, and I filled it. When the final announcement came, I nearly cried. I was chosen to lead the very team Ethan once controlled. On my first day in the new role, I walked into Ethan's old office. The nameplate was gone, the desk was empty, and in its place, I laid out my plans for the next big project, the one Ethan had tried to steal from me. This time, it had my name on it. Months later, I heard a rumor. Ethan had tried to join another company in the same industry, but when they ran a background check and called our HR, they passed on him. He'd burned every bridge he thought he could control. Meanwhile, my story was featured in a national business magazine under the headline, "From Betrayal to Leadership: How One Woman Reclaimed Her Power." That night, instead of sitting on a balcony in silence, I stood on a stage at a conference looking out at hundreds of professionals. And I ended my talk with the lesson that guided me forward. Revenge doesn't always mean watching someone else fall. Sometimes the best revenge is rising so high that they can never reach you again.